Configuring and upgrading the BIOS. Well, I've explained a little bit about what the BIOS is. You know that it's software, effectively firmware when it's encoded on a chip on the motherboard, and it allows the system during boot up to do an initial probe of hardware to figure out what's what and ultimately pass control to a bootloader such that your operating system can take over and give the user use of the computer. What would be some reasons why you'd want to boot the computer into the BIOS environment? Well, as I said earlier, you might find that your motherboard doesn't detect a new piece of hardware properly, so you may need to tweak those settings. Another, in troubleshooting, you may want to programmatically disable certain devices. You don't necessarily have to crack open the case and unplug a device to disable it. You can go into BIOS to disable it just as easily, actually more easily. Boot sequence is a really big one. If you need to boot the computer from, say, a USB thumb drive that has a recovery environment that you've built, as a PC tech, you're definitely going to build up a toolkit, not only of hardware tools, screwdrivers and that kind of stuff, but also you'll have DVDs and probably more commonly USB sticks that have recovery environments on them. How can you do that? Well, you go into BIOS UEFI setup and you make the settings from there. Adjusting clock speed. It used to be back in the old days, in the early 2000s, that we overclocked our motherboards to make them run faster. You might have a system clock rate of such and so cycles per second, and you could flip a few jumper switches on the motherboard to force the motherboard to go faster. That's not particularly smart. Chances are what you'll do as a PC tech is fix somebody's computer who's been horsing around with overclocking and you need to reset it back to a good setting. Another idea is, like I said, if the date and time goes bad, that may be a symptom that your BIOS UEFI firmware is going away because the battery is dying. And that's actually what I'm calling out on this motherboard. Check it out. See that silver circle thing? That's actually a watch battery that provides a steady trickle of power to your firmware, to your CMOS chip on your motherboard. And that answers the question how your settings, which the time and date are a good example of those settings, get preserved even if you power off your computer and unplug the cable. Have you ever thought of that? It's like, how does the computer remember all of its settings if I don't have power flowing to it? Well, it's a very low-tech solution. It's the battery. The actual BIOS is firmware, so that'll stay put even if you remove the battery, but it's the settings that get lost if the battery dies or if you pull the battery out.